Okay, I think we're going to start. Great to see such a good turnout. We're also keeping the lights kind of fairly bright for this. This is the idea is to kind of for this to feel a little bit like an organizing space. This is one of the more kind of, let's say, activist sessions that we're doing. The focus of this session is really what can be done about the power of big tech, and we've got two incredible guests with us tonight. So. My name is Jaya Klara Brekke. I am hosting this series on technology and power at Ibraaz. This is the third in the series. The series started off with a focus on quantum technology. This was back in the fall of 2025, where the idea was to really kind of start a series on technology and power from a bit of a hopeful place, a technology that isn't fully tainted by big tech and militarization, where there's a lot of kind of interesting ideas. It's still a kind of between, let's say, fundamental research and productizing. So really quite a kind of beautiful initial session. The second session was looking at technology from a human rights perspective, where, that's where we really got into the abuses of power by big tech and the complicity of big tech in the genocide in Gaza. Also topics like algorithmic racialization. And, it was a very powerful session, but really kind of brought us face to face with the sheer scale of what we're experiencing. So with this third session, the idea is really to look at what can be done about it and what kind of levers we have as human beings and also as society more generally to be a bit more part of shaping how technology plays out and how it affects our lives. The fundamental thesis of this series is that tech is a new form of power. It intertwines with political power, financial power, and military power in lots of different ways. But in and of itself, it is a new form of power that kind of shapes societies in very, very fundamental ways and is fundamentally about capacity. So when we're developing technologies, we're trying to extend our capacity to do things. We're trying to extend our capacity to maybe lift things that are heavier, travel farther, faster, analyze things deeper, reach more people, and so on and so forth. And the ways in which we extend that capacity really has a lot of kind of spillover effects. And who can use that capacity is, what really matters here. So, where technology in many ways might feel like a tool, we've kind of moved from technology being a tool that you can pick up and put down into a kind of era where technology in many ways is deeply, deeply embedded in our society at an infrastructural level. So we're talking not just about technological power, we're talking about infrastructural power, which means technical systems that are deeply and materially embedded in society, shaping how we relate to one another, shaping our social relations, our economic relations, our political relations, and doing that through systems that, as they become more and more embedded in the world, also become harder and harder to change in any kind of like fast or easy way, and also become harder to, simply not use, if you choose to. So that's the difference here. We've moved into an era where, technology really has become infrastructural, deeply embedded in shaping our societies. Not only that, we're also talking about infrastructures that are increasingly digital. And, when things are digital, then, we're also talking about systems that are more and more remote. So in a sense, you have kind of digital infrastructures that are also operated through cloud infrastructures, which means, the shaping of the infrastructures that we use happen in remote places and through remote processes, but which nevertheless have a material instantiation, which is what, we're going to talk a little bit with Fox Club about. So this series is really about understanding this new form of power, how it plays out in our lives, get our heads around it, and understand what it means for ordinary human beings and also for society more generally and for democracy. So This form of technological power is also a power that's increasingly concentrated in terms of control. So, we've got a handful of tech companies in the world that are really driving a lot of the technological transformations. This is, what we refer to as big tech. Most of these companies are particularly also, founded in and based out of the United States. And over the past year or two, we've seen, big tech companies no longer even trying to pretend that they're serving the kind of needs of a global humanity, but are increasingly and explicitly serving the needs of United States nationalist geopolitical agenda, an agenda which is also increasingly authoritarian. So there's been a distinct shift in the kind of flavor of what tech power actually means. Falling in, fully in line with a kind of authoritarian political and military agenda. That also has produced counter reactions, right? So we're seeing more and more skepticism around U.S. tech companies, resistance from not just activists, but actually also more and more employees coming out. So we're seeing a kind of difference between how the tech leadership act and the political, ideological, and even also religious views that are becoming quite extremist from kind of tech leadership is breaking away a lot from the sentiment from a lot of employees in these big tech companies. So we're seeing more and more kind of whistleblowers coming out, more organized resistance among employees, and then also more resistance happening also from actually national governments that are starting to become a bit hesitant and skeptical of integrating U.S. tech into national systems, given the kind of geopolitical and military and security risks that come alongside that. So, things have been moving very, very fast. This year has been pretty crazy for anyone who's reading the headlines. Especially in the kind of tech sector and its relationship to the genocide, the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the military campaigns and the kind of wars playing out in Iran and, of course, in Lebanon recently. So it can feel extremely overwhelming reading this news. It can feel like I think a lot of people have this feeling of, who the hell is doing anything about this, right? The kind of response seems inadequate. But I am personally incredibly inspired by the two guests that have been so generous to spend the time with us here this evening, and the work that they are doing in really trying to kind of get hands-on and reshape the kind of direction that things are moving in. So with that brief introduction, I would like to welcome Rosa from Foxglove and Vikram Subramanian, ex-school employee and now part of Nota, to join me on the stage. So I would like to maybe start with a bit of a conversation with you, Rosa, and the work that Foxglove are doing. So I'm just going to read out introduction, if that's okay. You are the co-founder and co-executive director of Foxglove, which is a UK tech justice non-profit that fights to make technology work fairly for everyone. Over the past 6 years, Foxglove has forced the UK government to admit for the first time it was wrong in forcing through a new hyperscaler data center without proper checks to make sure it wouldn't damage the environment. You've also worked with Open Democracy during the pandemic to expose how US spy tech firm Palantir was secretly handed its first contract with the NHS. This was back in 2021. And you've launched the first lawsuits against TikTok's union busting of its key safety workers in London. And that's just to mention a few cases, and you've got so many other cases going on right now. So I've personally been a huge fan of Foxglove for quite some years now. I have been following your work since 2021. I was also looking at Palantir quite early on. My background is working in privacy tech, and Palantir is a US spy tech company, so they've been on my radar for quite some time, also due to the nature of the founders. So yeah, when I first saw the work that you guys are doing, I was very inspired, and I was thinking, okay, here's a group that's actually trying to use democratic means to really, fight back and leverage, the law to try and fight back. But before we get into the concrete cases, you have a human rights law background, and you've been working in cases ranging from tax evasion by Goldman Sachs preventing the transfer and potential torture of detainees in Afghanistan. You've been defending the rights of child refugees coming to the UK, preventing the destruction of habitat of the Pacific grey whale. I mean, the list goes on and on. So you've been working on a lot of different areas. What led you to the current focus on big tech specifically, and also the founding of Foxglove as a tech justice group?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me. And it's so lovely to see so many of you here. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I really hope I'm not obscuring the screen. So I hope that you can see all three of us. Okay, good. So my background is I'm a UK lawyer. And I was working in private practice for a long time, predominantly suing the government and some other foreign governments in the European courts and international courts. And I worked a long time with my two co-founders. We were three women who co-founded Foxglove around a kitchen table in South London. And we had worked together for many years trying to bring the rule of law to the war on terror, so the UK and US's involvement in the war on terror. And that had taken us to look at things and representing people, for example, in Guantanamo Bay, challenging the Snowden kind of mass surveillance under principles of legal, journalistic and parliamentary privilege, and also challenging the involvement of the UK government in the CIA drone programme, which is what both the Snowden revelations and the drone programme is what made me become first aware of Palantir. So the grudge against Palantir goes back many years personally. And that work also made all three of us realise that actually data was now a massive means of power and literally a matter of life or death. We were representing individuals who had lost their entire family members based on kind of mobile data that had been collected. And we also became acutely aware that we were challenging the government, and actually alongside the government retention of data were these enormous companies who had far more data than our intelligence services would ever hope to obtain. And it felt to us like that was a power that wasn't really being checked sufficiently. We kind of sat in several kind of seminars where the companies would talk about kind of internal human rights assessments, trying to bring human rights kind of ideas into their frameworks, etc. But it felt to us, certainly at the time, which is now almost 7 years ago, that actually nobody was suing them and nobody was trying to bring the rule of law to the company's behaviour. There were kind of law firms and organisations challenging challenging companies on the kind of basis of big group claims seeking damages for data breaches, which is all kind of great, but there really wasn't people challenging companies for structural changes and behavioural changes that weren't trying to kind of seek huge amounts of damages. And it felt to us like there was a space where kind of the non-profit legal justice company could exist and hopefully do some good. We chose the law, which is very much one tool for us. We kind of see it very much as kind of a stone from which we hope other ripples will emerge. We definitely use the law in part, obviously, for its legal value, but also very much for its kind of campaigning value, which is kind of what you were talking about in terms of trying to bring kind of democratic accountability as well as legal accountability to the company's behaviour. The law is a kind of strange beast. It's very imperfect in terms of a kind of resistance tool, but it does, I think, have some real advantages, which is what we try and use it for. I think one of the things that it really can do is expose the kind of exercise of power. And try and make it more visible for people. So one of the cases that you mentioned, we took a case which was challenging the Home Office's use of a secret algorithm. There was an algorithm, there was one person who talked to one Financial Times journalist who revealed there was an algorithm in place to do with visa applications. It was an algorithm that had been in place for several years without being publicly kind of exposed. And we challenged it on the basis that we were of the view that there was a discriminatory nature to the algorithm. And we ended up issuing the case in court, and having done that, the government then admitted that there was, in essence, a list of what they described as risky nations, and if you were an applicant that happened to come from such a risky nation, then you were flagged as a red risk, and if you're an applicant who came from a non-risky nation, then you were given a green flag. And the amount of scrutiny that your kind of application got was very different if you were red or green, which is a very clear case of discrimination. And once that came to light, the government agreed to scrap the algorithm, and it was taken. It was no longer used. So that kind of ability to make visible where power is being exercised, I think, is one of the advantages of the kind of court case process. The other is that I think it sets up a kind of contest. I always think our cases are a bit like a piece of moral theatre. It's about trying to kind of drag something into an issue into a kind of contested space, basically, which is the court, but also the conversation that hopefully is created around the case more generally. And I think it does create quite a harsh light on the defendant to make a decision of whether they want to defend their actions or not. So to talk about a case we're taking in Kenya, we're representing am I talking too long? Yes, I'll stop talking.
We'll get to the Kenya case, definitely, because it's a very important case. But I wanted to touch on a couple of questions before we invite Vikram into the conversation as well. So if we can kind of just cover the Palantir bit, because Palantir is a very famous, villain by now. Everybody will have seen some headlines. They're also a very easy villain because they're so explicitly evil, which is quite different from, the rest of the tech sector. It's kind of some of the things you can't even make it up, right? The fact that the head of Palantir UK is Lewis Mosley, Oswald Mosley's grandson, which is the famous, fascist. It's, things like that, these anecdotes, even the name itself, right? Palantir, which is, comes from Lord of the Rings. It's the Sauron's mass surveillance device, right? They're not even hiding the fact that this is about mass surveillance and being evil. So it's kind of, they are a very easy villain, but because they're such an easy villain, sometimes it feels a bit like we can easily get a bit lazy about what the problem really is, right? I was reading an FT article today about Ming Tang, who's the head of data at the NHS, who's coming out strongly in support of Palantir, wants to integrate Palantir more deeply into the NHS, because from Ming Tang's perspective, this is software that really works, right? So when you're faced with that type of kind of like argument that this is software that really works, this is software that we need in the NHS, and this is coming from the leadership of the NHS, you really need to get your arguments in order, right? You really need to kind of understand, okay, what are the concrete critiques here? What are the ways that we can really kind of combat this move, right? So, bearing that in mind, like what is, from your perspective, maybe you could talk a little bit about the history of Foxglove challenging Palantir's involvement with the NHS.
Yeah, and I will speak more succinctly, sorry. So does everyone know who Palantir is? Yeah, fine, okay. So
I think people will be shy to say no, so you can please do go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So as we've just heard, Palantir's kind of core business is data and surveillance. And Peter Thiel, who is its founder, is one of Donald Trump's kind of biggest backers. Has donated huge amounts of money. It's been involved in the ICE operations, so the deportation raids and the seizing of unaccompanied minors during kind of Trump 1.0. And in Trump 2.0, it's been involved in all of the mass deportation programs of ICE, and also has helped to develop an identity and kind of human target program for ICE. It's also been involved in, as I was describing before, a lot of the GCHQ and NSA digital spy kind of agencies and the work they've been doing both during the war on terror and moving forward. And they've also provided support to the IDF during the war in Gaza. It is an organisation which is a kind of overtly supportive of Trump's policies and decisions in the world. And it was interesting that the British Medical Association came out recently basically saying that Palantir is an unacceptable choice of a partner for the NHS, predominantly because of its close links to the US government, which shows absolutely no regard for international law. They didn't say quite absolutely no, but that's what they meant.
And you... Foxglove was early on this. So as you mentioned earlier, already in 2021, you were challenging Palantir's involvement in the NHS. What happened back then, and then what has happened subsequently?
Please interrupt me. Well, sorry. Yes. So there was a bit like I described with the Home Office algorithm. There was this blog put out on the NHS England website, which basically announced that Palantir had won a contract for a COVID data store. When I say won, there was no procurement process. They were just given the contract, and Palantir gave over. I think it was £1 for that particular contract. And since then, and it's very clear that Palantir's ambition is to really be the operating system for the UK government. The NHS is definitely a kind of foot through the door, and that has sadly proved to be correct. So from our perspective, that award or the giving of that contract was really the start of something we felt that was really quite sinister. So we began to be involved when we saw that contract. At the time, it was the pandemic, and so a lot of the kind of normal procurement rules, data protection rules weren't in place. But we got involved in two cases challenging the process by which Palantir had been awarded the contract, and also looking at the safeguards that had been in place in relation to the COVID-19 data store, and really trying to prevent mission creep. So from our perspective, once they got the second contract, there were elements of that contract once they'd kind of very reluctantly provided it to us, having threatened legal action, that made clear that they were going to try and use the data for other issues beyond the pandemic. And we said that was completely unlawful, given that the rules and the purpose of the table was and the spreadsheet, well, this is slightly demeaning term, but it's really not much more than a giant spreadsheet, the COVID-19 data store. That actually it was very clear, it was very specific and very limited to that issue only. And we managed to force them to agree to that. They then obviously have been awarded something called the Federated Data Platform, and their £1 contract is now worth £330 million for 5 years. That is a contract which is up for renewal next year, and I would urge you all to get involved in the amazing campaigns that are now happening, trying to prevent Palantir from continuing to have a foot in the NHS and also more generally in the government.
Yeah, so, and after that 330 million NHS contract, they then got a 240 million defense contract as well, right? So as you say, the aim for them really is to become the operating system for the UK government.
Yeah, we've done quite a lot of work trying to follow where the Palantir contracts are, and there are a lot. So the Metropolitan Police have one, the FCA have one, the MOD have one, the London Mayor has Palantir as one of its potential suppliers, Coventry Council has one, Herts Police have one. They are aiming both for the kind of high-level national government contracts, but also for the local level contracts. So from their perspective, they're trying to make sure they kind of swoop up both the national and the more local.
Yeah. But the tide is turning on Palantir. You're running an incredible campaign. Amnesty, the British Medical Association, as you mentioned, Good Law. There seems to be a lot of kind of good organizing that's happening right now. I see in the media and also in terms of just emailing MPs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's some debate happening next week, I believe, in Parliament on the break clauses of the contract, right?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is a lot of the NHS trusts have also chosen not to use the platform. So a large number of trusts have basically said that this software is actually not much use.
So sorry to interrupt. I have to mention the Connect system, the biggest system connecting HMRC, benefit system, DVLA, every online account, 100 countries, all financial institutions. Why aren't people talking about the Connect system? Oh, travel in and out of the country, it connects all of it.
Absolutely. It's terrifying.
So let's definitely get into that conversation, very important conversation. The big picture is these data platforms are about connecting all the different data points. And at that point, you know, we're not in a good place. I would like to hand over to Vikram. There is so much more to go into here because there is also a whole connection to the Epstein files and Mandelson and everything that you were pursuing in relation to the Palantir cases. We can get into that maybe in the Q&A later. But for now, I would like to, because what I wanted to say earlier, Palantir is an easy villain, right? They are so explicitly evil. But there are a lot of other big tech companies that have a far more, let's say, technocratic form of evil, a kind of certain carelessness or explicit involvement in the genocide in Gaza and in plenty of other kind of problematic cases that we'll talk about also more in the Q&A. That are far less, they present themselves as, far less as these kind of natural villains, but nevertheless, have been committing, a lot of crimes and breaking international law for quite some time. So Google, this company that is, presents itself as fairly neutral, providing these services to all of us, in a sense, one could say Google is far more of a US spy tech company than Palantir is, far more successful US spy tech company than Palantir is, working closely with the NSA for a couple of decades, the first, truly mass surveillance deal and system. And we have with us today Vikram Subramanian, who is an ex-Google engineer, and who organizes with No Tech for Apartheid in Zurich. So Vikram has worked in big tech for more than 20 years, started organizing with Nota in 2024 after learning about Project Nimbus. This was a contract signed by Google and Amazon to provide cloud services and AI services to the Israeli government and the IDF. Vikram, really great to have you here with us remotely. Over to you.
Hey, thank you for having me here. I'm just going to use some slides. So let me set that up.
And while Vikram is setting that up, maybe I can also reveal that No Tech for Apartheid EU is currently having a launch event in Berlin right now. So there's a few launch events happening across Europe as the organization is spreading from the United States to Europe and getting more and more involved in direct action, organizing amongst big tech employees here as well.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for having me here. I'm Vikram. I'm a software engineer and ex-Google worker. And I'm here to talk mainly about Project Nimbus and in general about like militarization in big tech, how it's increasing. A short introduction, like I was a Google engineer for more than 13 years, drank the Kool-Aid, like everything. And last 4 years, I've been in Zurich, and the last 4 years in Google also is in Zurich. And since 2024, I've been organizing with No Tech for Apartheid when I realized that by April 2024, it was clear that a genocide was unfolding in Gaza, and Google was like very consciously being part of it. And how they are part of it is essentially Project Nimbus. Um, uh, I think Jaya went over it, but I'll mention it again. It's a $1.2 billion contract. To say that it's not really a big monetary thing for Google, really. Between Google and Amazon, the Israeli government, but actually mostly with the IDF, right, and the Ministry of Defense. The Ministry of Defense has been involved from day one, even before signing the contract, and they are the ones who decided who gets the contract, and they gave it to Google and Amazon specifically for their superior like AI and big data and cloud platform, right? And it was signed in 2021. But of course, after October 2023, the role of these cloud services, Project Nimbus, in the genocide in Gaza has been like increasing, and we are also finding out how directly it's contributing. I mean, again, the shocking part is how Google and Amazon actually saw what was happening in Gaza as a marketing opportunity to go and like compete with each other, since there were like two companies on the contract, to sell their AI platform as the one that the IDF should use when the genocide was happening, right? So many of the information we have are from IDF itself, who are very, I don't know, open about sharing some of these things. I mean, there's a whole timeline of how we got to know about how deeply Project Nimbus is complicit in the genocide, but I'll just mention some of the points. One of the main thing was in July 2024, there was a conference called IT for IDF, which is a thing that happened within the IDF, and where they talk about Project Nimbus and AI and cloud tools. And what was shocking there was, and of course, Google was listed as a sponsor for that event. And one of the colonels in IDF, the main one in charge of IT, mentioned like how great like these public clouds were. And as their systems are getting overloaded after October 2023, they were actually moving their workloads to Google, Amazon, and some part of Microsoft. And they really liked it because, their own words, because of the crazy wealth of like big data and AI services available on these public clouds, and that they provided very significant operational effectiveness during the whole operation siege of Gaza. Right, and the person also goes ahead to say that like cloud is a weapon in every sense of the word, right? So just adding like a screen cap, like we have a whole video of from the conference, then explaining like how essentially they use the public cloud. And so I mean, of course, there's a platform, but what is IDF capable of, like of using these systems for? So to just illustrate that, I want to go over like a couple of systems. Of course, from the IDF sources itself, we know that there are dozens of AI-based systems that the IDF uses in their operation, and I want to highlight a couple of them. The first one is called Lavender AI. Again, is revealed by IDF sources themselves. It's a AI-based human targeting system, and it predicts the target using different signals, like the person's location based on where they are, like in the cell phone signal network, or their activity in things like WhatsApp groups, And based on that, it will predict whether somebody is what they would consider as a target, right? While presumably the system was available even before October 2023, what we hear is after they started, like the genocide started unfolding, it started getting used in a way with minimal human intervention, right? The so-called human in the loop was the actual decision was like simplified a lot, and they say like almost the only thing they checked at some point was whether the target is male or not. Right, and of course they also relaxed the whole collateral damage allowed for each of these targets, and the parameter that they were also optimizing for was definitely not accuracy, right? And their main aim was to have a source of target that was never-ending, and the picture there is actually a slide that they have for the system, which looks very innocuous for such a dangerous system. The next system is Where's Daddy? And again, like a very sick name for a AI system that doesn't even try to hide its intentions. It's essentially like alerting system when a target that they want to essentially kill has entered their home, right? Because that's when they think there's a maximum probability of actually killing that person. And the targets that were generated from Lavender were getting fed into this Where's Daddy system. And then it would alert an officer who would then order a bombing of the target. Right, and from the sources themselves, initially they were feeding in like a few of the targets, but by December 2023, like they were like just taking all the targets from Lavender, which were around like tens of thousands of targets, and feeding them directly into the Lavender system, right? And we saw what it led to, like entire families being wiped out, and like a big part of the genocide. Right. And just to tie it with some of the Palantir stuff, we think like systems like these could also be developed with a partnership with AI predicting tools by companies like Palantir also, right? So I just wanted to say that these are the kinds of systems that the IDF was doing. It's definitely like an advanced like use of AI, and also in an environment where there is absolutely no constraints, right? So what we witnessed because of all this is the what I would say is the first AI-powered genocide, right? And we know from statements and from the IDF itself, and from what we know of these systems, it wouldn't have been possible without the cloud and AI systems provided by big tech, right? So, and mainly Google, Amazon, and a bit of Microsoft. And the systems that we are talking about, and this is the case of not a simple dual use in like the traditional sense, because it's not like a software left in a server somewhere that somebody downloaded and used it for something bad, right? These are live systems that are the whole stack from the hardware to the networking to the software owned by big tech. Right, and these systems are live, monitored by employees. They're updated on a day-to-day basis, and maintained by big tech, like employees, without whom the system wouldn't keep running. Right. So, we feel in that way the complicity of employees in this situation is even like higher, and it's a very new area where also regulations have sort of not caught up, and it's part of like what we are trying to do in terms of awareness. So all this led to like finally like us working with the UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese to document the complicity of big tech, and in our case specifically Google, in her report like the economy of genocide. where we essentially provided all the public documentation to say like how big tech is complicit. And we also have extensive documentation released as part of work by whistleblowers, working with journalists to essentially show that Google knew at every step, like before signing, after signing the contract, after October 2023, they very clearly knew like the risk of like the large scale human rights violation that they were signing up for, and still went ahead, right? I mean, we can discuss why they did that. It's not just monetary, but a lot of different things that we think, right? We can only guess. So yeah. And I mean, and the thing is also, it doesn't just stop, right? Project Nimbus is just we feel is the beginning of these things. And just like the conventional arms industry, like the digital arms industry that's coming up, and really big tech is becoming like an integral part of the military industrial complex, is using Palestine as a laboratory. Right, so to use the word term coined by Anthony Lowenstein for conventional arms, they are able to do stuff, experiment stuff, and they almost see it as a marketing point to then take it and export it in different parts of the world. I mean, and we are seeing, again, the recurring discussion around use of big tech, but also all the AI tools in the Department of War in the US. And I also want to say that Google has definitely embraced its new place in this whole military complex. Since Trump got elected in 2025, since the beginning of 2025, Google dropped its AI principles, which the main point being none of our systems should be used for harming people, and is working directly with Lockheed Martin for their Gen AI-based targeting, has expanded partnership with Palantir to get certified for use for sensitive workloads with the US government. It's a cloud backbone for ICE, has many contracts with ICE, and it has done things like outed Palestinian student information to ICE to get them deported. And to recently, later in 2025, even go to the extent of cutting off access to ICC judges, right? So it's really becoming like a central part of, as you said, the U.S. both domestic and foreign policy, like an arm of almost like enforcing it by force. Right, and it's being exported to different authoritarian forces of the world. I'd like to just quickly mention what we do as NOTA and what our approach to creating a change here. I mean, first and foremost, No Tech for Apartheid, or NOTA, is a worker-based organization, trying to primarily cancel Project Nimbus, but also extending it to control the spread of militarization in big tech. It was started right after the Nimbus contract was signed in 2021, but of course it got a lot of organizing after October 2023. I mean, again, as I said, these are systems which cannot run without constant worker input to the system. And that's why we see a worker as a very important point of leverage in trying to bring the big tech into accountability, while conventional regulatory systems are just not working, right? Given the deep collusion between the government and these big tech companies, we see worker as a very important leverage point. And we use conventional organizing and union toolbox to essentially build a base big enough so that these companies cannot ignore us. And it's an ongoing work. I mean, the challenges are definitely, Google again has changed from being an open discussions company to a company with the ridiculous amount of repression to doing things like even censoring discussions around how our work is used, our complicity in genocide, banning words like genocide inside the company, and not allowing us to even like put up posters and things like that, right? I mean, that is definitely a big part of the challenge, but equally big part is like big tech employees are not used to being part of a union, right? And I mean, and that's again an ongoing work. We are trying to essentially make people feel that they have the power to change things if they can come together. And again, that's a thing, that's a challenge that we are working with, right? So, I, in just a minute, I'll just say like how we are expanding a little bit more, like as a movement outside of worker organization. We are trying to do like cross-disciplinary work, like using the hiring pipeline of students as definitely as one of the choke points that we can apply pressure at, and of course doing events like this to raise awareness with everybody. And what we started doing in that Europe specifically is having like open gatherings where we again get a very diverse set of people together to be in an environment where they've like we build like the agency to like reclaim power back from big tech, right? And we like work on different projects. For example, in Zurich, we are building a complicity map. Zurich is a very like unique place where it's a very small place, but it has all of big tech represented in like few streets, right? And also has a very strong like tech university, which almost prides itself in being apolitical. So we are trying to change all that in Zurich, right? So, and again, we see like a lot of opportunities working like the intersectional groups like human rights, anti-militarism, but also people who are worried about spread of like AI data centers in their countries, in their neighborhoods. And those also we see as powerful leverage points where we can pressurize big tech working in the SOCs, right? So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Vikram. So I wanted to pick up on one of the points that you were mentioning, so and that can maybe also highlight the importance of worker organizing. So you were saying that with Project Nimbus, what we're seeing is not a kind of simple case of dual-use technology where a company develops some technology, it can be used for civilian purposes or military purposes, they hand it over, it gets used for whatever, but that we're actually talking about live systems that require ongoing maintenance and service provision, where, you know, actually engineers are, in a sense, directly actors in the battlefield, although remotely, right? So I think that's kind of like quite a significant point to make. It also makes me think a lot about this concept that Palantir has about forward deployed engineers. So they have this idea, you know, when they're trying to roll out a piece of software, why do they tend to be so successful at gaining all the contracts? It's because they have this concept of a forward deployed engineer, which is, you know, highly technical and highly skilled workers that get sent out and are working in close collaboration with their intended user base. And in the case of Palantir, you know, they have a selective intended user base, which is, you know, governments really, right? And especially kind of military and police also. So, you know, that point that you made, it breaks a lot of assumptions around technology as this kind of like neutral tool. It also breaks the assumption of kind of these systems as being super automated, where engineers are kind of like, you know, whatever, these passive actors that develop something and then it goes out into the world and it does whatever. But that we really are talking about these live systems. And somehow that also makes me think that worker organizing is potentially a very powerful lever. So yeah, I was wondering if kind of actually either of you have a kind of response to that as like, you know, let's say a very different narrative than what's usually presented in the media of, you know, how technology actually operates. Yeah, please go ahead, Vikram. And maybe you could also talk a bit about just your personal experience. You were working at Google, when you started talking about Project Nimbus, what were the responses from the rest of your employees? When did you start to recognize yourself as being complicit and therefore needing to take action?
But I think it's related to both of things that you said. I actually work in I used to work in the core infrastructure team, which is so I was building tools for the internal big data platform inside Google. And that's really the foundations of the big data platform is then the foundation of the AI, like the LLMs and like the newer like AI-based training systems, right? And these are essentially packaged as cloud offerings and then provided to the cloud customers. And really the turning point for me, of course, I was more starting to get involved with the Palestinian cause after October 2023, more externally, but I knew about Nimbus, but I wasn't making the connection. I was still buying the story of Google who said, oh, this whole project is only for civilian use. Till an article came out in the Time magazine, which specifically said Google signed a new contract with the Ministry of Defense in March of 2024, when it was already clear the ICJ had already said the genocide is plausible, and at that and the Time article specifically mentioned how they had built a custom landing page to expose big data and AI tooling. And that really felt close to what I was working on. And that really flipped my whole perspective on the thing. And I started getting involved with the whole Nota thing, right? And definitely, as he said, these are systems which cannot run without worker involvement. And it is definitely a newer area that we are trying to grapple with. And I want to mention it's not just, the contract also specifically says Google should provide special training to all their IDF staff and as part of the contract, but also that Google cannot apply any of its terms of service that it applies to regular cloud customers to this contract, right? And that they cannot restrict what sort of workloads actually run on these systems. So in some sense, Google wants both sides, right? On one side, they want to take in the work of the best engineers in the world, pretending that it is all protected. Because the standard PR statement is, oh, we are very serious about our terms of service. And we found evidence that no, it's clear that no terms of service applies to this particular contract. And on the other side, they want to tell IDF, you can use it however you want, and we will pretend that we don't know what you're using it for. Right. So yeah, I think that's the situation.
Maybe to kind of pick up on the Labour point. First of all, to say what amazing work Nota are doing. It's totally inspiring, and I just think it's so courageous and brilliant. In terms of Labour, I do think there is a real kind of I think Labour is a really important place of resistance in relation to these big tech companies. I think that in two ways. One is I think there is this kind of myths that the big tech companies try and present us with, which is there are basically like a handful of men who sit in dorms or garages and come up with these incredible products that change our world. And they try and make invisible the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who, in fact, are working in those companies. So I think there's a real need to be very clear about the huge number of people who work there and not to buy into this kind of myth that I think these companies try and create to make invisible the workforces that are needed. But also I think it is a place of real resistance. And And there are very clear business choices made by the companies to pick up this point about neutrality. So there's a case we're doing about Meta's and Facebook in particular's role in the conflict in Ethiopia. And in 2021, we're acting for an incredible young man whose father was one of the most kind of eminent professors in Ethiopia, and he was doxxed on a number of posts on Facebook in Ethiopia, and two incredibly kind of slanderous and doxing posts, which his son saw. The professor didn't have an account on Facebook, but his son saw these posts and reported them to Facebook saying, look, this is a death sentence for my father, please remove them in this moment in Ethiopia. He's a Tigrayan man living in an Amharic majority area, and these posts are literally a death sentence for him, please remove them. And Abraham, our client, reported them repeatedly many times every day. And very sadly, Facebook did absolutely nothing in response. It was also reported by some of the trusted partners who Facebook was working with. And tragically and horrifically, his father was followed from the address that was put in the post and killed outside his family home. And Facebook, there are business decisions that led to those events. Facebook had chosen not to train its algorithm in any of the Ethiopian languages. So all of the Ethiopian languages were not being picked up by the algorithm in terms of that kind of content moderation that's being done by technology. But also they'd made labor choices. They had chosen to employ 25 people, 25 content moderators for a population of 117 million people. And those content moderators who were doing an impossible job spoke 3 of 85 languages spoken in Ethiopia. So there was literally nobody home. And what Frances Haugen's papers, I think, reveal so clearly is that these are choices made by Facebook. Facebook chooses not to invest in what it calls rest of world. They don't see the Ethiopian people, to be frank, as important enough, or their lives as important enough to invest their money and cost them a tiny smidgen of their profit. And we saw with Frances Haugen's documents, when the Capitol Hill kind of riots, protest happened, Facebook within 3 hours took steps to change the way in which its software was operating. It muted posts, it's removed posts. There was immediate action in 2 to 3 hours. In Ethiopia, not one of those steps were taken in the context of 600,000 people dying. That is a choice by Facebook not to invest in the people that are needed in order to make sure their platforms are safe.
Yeah. Which points to a completely different form of evil than the kind of Palantir form, right? Which is this kind of sheer neglect. And also, implicit or explicit forms of structural racism.
Yeah, I mean, that's a total blatant racism from my perspective. They've chosen to invest 13% in rest of world moderation and 87% in Europe, Canada, and America. That is just straight up racism. I also think I think it's slightly more than neglect. I think it's a really conscious decision. Like some of the papers that Haugen disclosed showed that there were requests made from the safety team to invest in more content moderators, and Facebook decided it was too expensive. Like that is a conscious decision not to invest in that workforce that is crucial to keeping their platforms safer. I wouldn't even go as far as saying safe, no. But safer.
Yeah, and off the back of the Myanmar case as well. So it's quite wild that they continue with that sort of behavior. Yeah, go ahead.
I had one more thing.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
I also just to think about this question about organising. So the moderation, the office that was the kind of moderation hub for Ethiopia at the time was in Nairobi in Kenya, and that's where the content moderators were situated. And these content moderators began to organise and began to form a union because the working conditions of content moderators is hideous. These are individuals who are being paid a tiny amount of money to review and look at and have to make really difficult decisions about what stays online and what doesn't. You know, I sit here as a lawyer knowing I have colleagues who have like decades worth of kind of professorships and otherwise on this question about freedom of expression. So this is a very complicated work, but there are also individuals who are being asked to look at some of the most horrific content. You know, people have described to me, people being burnt alive on video in front of them, watching children kind of being raped and live in front of their faces, which of course is incredibly damaging, and there needs to be a proper psychological, psychiatric support for this workforce. And what's extraordinary is that there certainly was nothing in Kenya. There isn't here either in London. The TikTok content moderators that we're representing who were also made redundant or sacked because they dared to kind of want to try and create a union here. There is no proper support for them at all for this incredibly important work. And I think this need to organise, and in a way what I think is so encouraging about the work that's happening about NOTA is also trying to get the different workforces to be involved and to join together and, to be honest, to hold hands. So one of the things that would be amazing from our perspective, and what we're always trying to encourage at Foxglove, is a kind of way in which the content moderators in Nairobi, who are also, you know, moderating YouTube, are also holding hands with the engineers of Google in Zurich or in London, and trying to create that kind of solidarity across the different workforces, I think would be absolutely incredible and so powerful in terms of a resistance.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. So now's the time to think a little bit about what you might want to ask, and there'll be a roaming mic. You know, the focus of this, session is really on this topic of what are we doing about it, right? And we've talked a little bit about the way that Foxglove is leveraging the law and also communications campaigns. And we've talked about NOTA and worker organizing and mobilizing amongst big tech employees. So, which is really important because these are forms of doing something about it that does tackle some of the kind of structural questions. Because this is like maybe a bit of a muddled question, but one of the things that I find kind of difficult in this whole space of dealing with big tech is we are talking about big tech. So we're talking about companies that run systems that all of us use in our day-to-day lives, right? And many times when people hear about these scandals and these human rights abuses and breaking of international law, there is this kind of urge to want to do something about it. It's like, okay, what do I do? Do I deinstall my app? Do I stop using Google? There is this kind of like, what is the appropriate form of action or reaction by ordinary people in these sorts of contexts? But also to bring it up a notch, there is also that question of kind of governments, right, and procurement processes. When do you say no to a contract from a company who's solving an actual technical problem that you have because they're also doing XYZ really evil thing? And the problem is they might be the best company in the world that has actually hired some of the best engineers in the world to solve this specific problem. So, these are not easy questions to kind of answer. And this isn't a kind of like, simple kind of like, that's bad, we're going to stop using all the technology that we have available to us because they really own a lot of the stack. Exactly because we're talking about capacity and infrastructures that are deeply, deeply embedded in our social life, our economic life, democratic institutions, governments, companies, and so on. So that process of disentangling from big tech and process of disentangling more specifically from US big tech is like, it feels like what, all of Europe is grappling with now, most certainly, and in many ways, most of the world really, both at the individual and the structural level. So I guess my question to you guys are, or is on the topic of kind of appropriate scale of action, almost like trying to kind of like, how can we all feel more empowered, knowing that like, okay, well, you can do X, Y, Z, but these other things might not be so effective, or, what is the appropriate scale and forms of actions when we're talking about organizing to, limit the powers of big tech and also steer innovation and technological development towards other directions.
Who would you like to go first?
Vikram?
Yeah. As you said, big tech is probably difficult to target in terms of like a direct boycott or like individual choices in some sense. Right. But definitely, as I said, like, definitely worker organizing is one part. But for people outside, these tech companies still rely on like, I think that they rely a bit on like their reputation still being good outside, and that is definitely a point where people can apply pressure. We are seeing it in terms of like, again, as a adjacent movement, like how people are getting together using democratic means to get big tech data centers out of their towns. Right, which has been hugely successful, and it's a very like a point where it actually hurts big tech, right? And so we can work across concerns. Of course, not just like your town, but also like climate activists, and in some sense, big tech is making it easier in the sense they have completely removed all notion of appearing good in so many different areas that I feel like now it's probably the silver lining is now we have a point where we can again like work across these concerns and apply pressure against big tech. And again, when big tech is trying to get into your government or town, again, working with at apply pressure also provides an opportunity to control big tech, right? And anything human rights related, like I think big tech should not be there. Like human rights orgs, the UN still holds a AI for Good conference in Geneva every year and invites big tech. Like there should be no place for them. There should be no place for these big tech to come and sit in a place in the university like campuses saying they're doing good. Like they should sit along with Lockheed Martin and Palantir and then like make it clear that what they are doing, right? And those are the kinds of things that we are trying to push for. It.
This is a huge question. Maybe I'll just try and focus on one thing, which is the state regulation is absolutely key. I think it's incredibly important for us all within our democratic spaces to be demanding that. I think if you look at when Trump came into power the second time and he made clear that there may well be regulation on big tech companies, the threat of that made them all change their behavior. So I think we actually have evidence really quite recently that even the threat of regulation can make a difference. And trying to demand from our governments that regulation seems completely crucial to me. That regulation obviously comes in many, many different forms, but from a Foxglove perspective, the size of these companies is really crucial. It's the size that really allows them to be abusive, in whether it's to do with their workers, whether it's to do with the way in which they treat independent news, the way in which they kind of poison all of our public squares and our kind of communications, whether it's to do with the way in which they choose to not keep their platform safe. They get away with all of this because they are so huge and they are monopolists, and that is where the state really, really needs to come in and intervene. And they have the powers to do that, and they are electing not to. And I think in terms of state intervention, that would be a really crucial moment for us, is to be demanding that they are cut down to size.
And just as a kind of handover to the audience, the tide is turning. There is good news, right? So we do, like I think last week, New York City, all the hospitals in New York City kicked Palantir out, which is incredible. Maybe the NHS will follow that suit. And of course, also, it's interesting to see where big tech actually reacts very strongly. So I don't know how many people noticed a story that was circulating around the Swiss government basically continuously, repeatedly refusing any contracts with Palantir for national security, data sovereignty, tech sovereignty basis. So that was actually reported by a small news outlet in Switzerland and picked up like wildfire all across Europe, sparking debates in Germany and in the UK about their own Palantir contracts, which resulted in Palantir now suing that small news outlet for running that story. So, you can see, like, there's a lot of stories that Palantir doesn't care about, right? They're like, we don't mind being the evil guys. It gets us a lot of PR. It's fine. Talk all the shit you want about us. We don't mind that at all. It's part of their brand. It's part of their image. But anything that threatens the contract, then you start to see, very, very strong reactions. So there are levers. There is a, counterpower that is building. So this building has to close at 8. So I'm just going to say that I'm going to move to the pub across the street. And I think a few of us in the room are going there. So let's have the conversations there rather than in the building so that the wonderful employees can get on with their job. And also, finally, the next session of Tech and Power is on the 6th of May. The focus is going to be on using technology for progressive purposes. So really kind of the tools that we have available, but towards progressive purposes, focusing on artificial intelligence. We've got an incredible philosopher and someone from Autonomy Institute joining us then. So sign up already now if you want to join us then. Thank you so much.